Alrighty, welcome back everyone. We just talked about the CFP in review, just kind of went through all of the games that have already unfolded. Definitely a lot of craziness in that one, especially that Texas-Arizona State game and then those semifinal games. Definitely kept us on our toes, but we have two teams left, and that brings us to a little bit of a trend that has unfolded throughout the CFP, which is just blowouts in these title games. You have two teams that seem to be relatively evenly matched, and then they officially get on the field, and one team just rolls the other. And it's been varying degrees throughout this thing. Obviously, we had a 3-year run that was absolutely incredible in this thing, but at the end of the day, been a lot of different blowouts, a lot of different games decided by more than 2 scores, and there's really only been 3 that have been decided by less than 2 scores. So let's get into all the games that have happened in the CFP thus far, and then we'll get into why I think this year and the next couple of years will be a little bit different when we talk about that. But let's start with the ones that have already unfolded in the CFP. It obviously started with Ohio State winning the first 4 team. They could obviously win the first 12 team today. Would be quite the storyline, no doubt about that. And it was Ezekiel Elliott, it was Cardale Jones that really stole the show. It was obviously an incredible game against Alabama that really got this thing kicked off. And then they were able to handle business against an Oregon team that was a ton of fun. That was definitely a team that was very dangerous. Ohio State was able to do it, and Cardale Jones became a legend around Columbus, Ohio for a very long time. Then we had the 3-year run that everyone wishes would come back, and I think might just come back in a couple of years here, but Clemson, Alabama had a number of battles throughout those years. They had the back-to-back ones, and it was a crazy couple of games. You had Alabama get that 5-point win against Clemson in the first one. Remarkable game. Derrick Henry kind of just ran all over him. Jake Coker led them to that national championship over Deshaun Watson for Clemson. Then the next year, you had Hunter Renfrow make the play of maybe Clemson history, frankly, against Alabama, the walk-off touchdown that every Alabama fan will tell you was a pick play to this day. I might just tell you the same thing. But at the end of the day, it was an incredible battle. It was Jalen Hurts' first year at Alabama, so fell a little bit short there, didn't play the greatest game, and it made way for what was the weirdest championship game that I can remember. If I'm being totally honest, this was the Tua game. Jalen Hurts struggles in the first half, throws a couple of picks. UGA looks like a team that is firmly on their way to a national title, and then Tua comes into the mix. Makes a number of big-time throws. The throw to Devontae Smith that was just getting the legend started for Devontae Smith as a freshman. Definitely put them in a really good spot, and obviously won that game, kept the Alabama dynasty rolling, put them in an incredible position, and then they got Clemson one more time. They got Clemson in. Clemson just rolled over them. Trevor Lawrence and Trevor Etienne were incredible in that game, put them on the top of the mountaintop, obviously ended did not end Trevor Lawrence's career, but remarkable game there. Got Clemson to the top of the mountaintop for the second time over Alabama and put Dabo Swinney in some pretty rarefied air when you talk about head coaches in college football. Then you did move forward to the two buzzsaws of the CFP era, which were 2019 LSU and 2020 Bama. 2019 LSU, Clemson definitely put up a fight in that game. It was very close in the first half, and then Jamar Chase just tore A.J. Terrell to pieces throughout that game. Really remarkable game from LSU. Obviously finished off what could be described as the best season of a CFP team thus far. Definitely going to be really awesome to watch what happened in this game. And I tend to agree with you, Anthony, on the formatting issues. Definitely something that we'll talk about a little bit later in the weekend. Something that we got a little bit of news on this past weekend, and we'll talk about that in the next segment. But overall, these games were incredible. You had LSU just kind of roll over their opponent, finish off what ends up being, in my opinion at least, the best CFP team we've seen thus far. They were followed right back up by the second best team we've seen thus far in the CFP era. Alabama just rolls over Ohio State the last time Ohio State was in this game, and then we had the Georgia-Alabama game. This was obviously decided by 15 points, but was a really fun game, back and forth, with definitely a game that, until Keely Ringo made that play, there was a lot of nervous people in Athens, Georgia, that Alabama was going to do it again, that they were going to be able to beat them for what felt like a millionth time in a row and win another national title. But Keely Ringo makes the play, puts Georgia on top of the sport, and they did not stop by any means. They move on to another national title. They beat the crap out of TCU. Obviously got that incredible game against Ohio State that kind of felt like a pseudo-national championship at the time, but at the end of the day, Georgia gets a big-time win over TCU. This is a huge blowout and a huge talking point for a lot of people that kind of peddle this narrative. And then you did have Michigan get the win over Washington last year. Was a remarkable game. at the end of the day, the Michigan defense was just too much for Washington. Washington felt like they used just about all of their ability against Texas in that semifinal where they went absolutely crazy. But at the end of the day, was a remarkable 10 seasons. Definitely had some different things, and I think when you look back at a lot of these games, you have the LSU Clemson game, like Anthony just talked about, wasn't necessarily quite as lopsided as one seems. That Georgia Alabama game obviously was very close to the very end, and then you had this 3-year run that was just downright incredible with Clemson Alabama, and then Georgia Alabama at the very end of it was a really good 4-team CFP era. We moved forward to the 12-team, obviously, and the question is, will it be different going forward? Will we be able to find a couple of really good CFP championships? And I'll talk about this year first, and then we'll get into the future of the CFP and why I think it's going to at least somewhat change as we go forward. For this one tonight, 2 elite defenses. That's the main reason why this thing is going to be incredible. Notre Dame and Ohio State are top 2 defenses in the country. When you talk about points per game allowed, they have an ability to keep themselves in it, give them multiple chances in this game, even against elite offenses. They will have the ability to make sure that they at least stay in this game. If one team can move the ball super consistently, I'll be surprised. And now I think Ohio State's going to make their plays. I think Notre Dame's going to make their plays. But I don't think anyone's going to have a ton of down-to-down success running the football. I don't think anyone's going to have a ton of down-to-down success really executing at a very high level on the offensive side of the ball. We saw the Ohio State-Texas game. It just didn't look really in sync for Ohio State in a lot of that game. Definitely was a game where that offense looked at least mortal for the first time in the CFP, and Notre Dame, as Anthony was talking about, might just have a little bit better of a defense than Texas does. Definitely a very tough battle, but 2 elite defenses and definitely 2 defenses that can keep Ohio State at least at bay for a time being. Same thing with Ohio State, obviously. Tons of guys on that defense and playing at a ridiculously high level. Then you got some gamers at quarterback, and this cannot be overstated. These 2 guys are just winners. Will Howard has played really good football throughout the CFP, probably better than any other quarterback in the CFP thus far, and then Riley Leonard just makes winning plays. That's what he does. He made multiple third down runs against UGA that put him in a great spot, a couple of great passes against Penn State that were absolutely massive, especially that one to Jaden Greathouse, and these guys just win football games. That's what they've been able to do throughout their entirety of their careers. That's what they're going to be able to do tonight, and we'll see who can end up winning out. Definitely going to be a really interesting thing to watch, and yeah, I think when you talk about, diversity in run game, both these teams do an incredible job. Chip Kelly is absolutely incredible at using motion, using wide receivers to play around with some different things. Obviously, that 3-headed monster helps them out a little bit over there at Notre Dame, but when you talk about diverse run games, these might be the 2 most diverse in the entire country. Really remarkable packages, and they do some really incredible things, and these quarterbacks are obviously at the center of it. Frankly, I do think we're going to see a little bit more of Will Howard running the football in this game. Definitely will be interesting to watch that unfold and see which one of these run games can kind of win out at the end of the day. And then Notre Dame's ability to just stay in it. They have this weird superpower, and it's hard to describe. It's hard to put a number on it or figure out just exactly why. But they have this thing that if they look up at the scoreboard and they're a little bit down or it's a really close game, they're going to make sure that it stays a really close game. They're going to make sure that they keep their foot on the gas, that they make sure that this offense does not get going when they really need to, and it goes all over the place. I think there's going to be so many different things that unfold in the last little bit, and Oregon, TCU, Washington. I think there's an argument to be made either way. I think when you look back at that 2014 season, TCU was a really good team. And then TCU in the 2022 season, a lot of people question, what was the Big 12 that year? Was it really all that strong? At the end of the day, I've always kind of gone with the most deserving teams should get in. And in those years, I think TCU wins a Big 12 championship, probably deserves to be in. I think Washington obviously was a really great team when they got in that 2015 year. It was a very weird year in general. So overall, I think there were a lot of people that you could definitely question as you look back, and we'll be able to do that almost a little bit more when you get into the 12-team playoff. Definitely something that we'll talk about as we get throughout the rest of the week. We'll talk about what the 12-team holds, and we'll talk about the future, what the future holds, and why I think it'll be a little bit different when we talk about the national championship. The scales are evening. I don't think there's any question about that. As we've seen throughout this year, the Big Ten and the SEC are kind of evening up at the top, with the SEC not having quite the edge that they've had the past couple of years, and then the Big 12 and the ACC are just becoming more dangerous. You look at what the ACC can be next year with Clemson and Miami and plenty more teams that are really going to be in the mix for the ACC. I think Clemson is a downright title contender as we head into 2025. I think next year could be even more parity laden than this one was. Now, it's going to be really hard to beat that, but I do think it's going to be a little bit all over the place. And you look at what the SEC has next year, a lot of questions at quarterback for a lot of different teams, and we'll see who can find their way out of that one. Going to be an incredible, incredible year, and overall, you can see the scales kind of evening in this sport. That's going to make for some really, really incredible CFP games down the stretch. Then you have multiple postseason games to kind of quote-unquote warm up. Obviously, they're not warm-up games by any means. You got to win them. But at the end of the day, it definitely does give way for some of these semifinal, final games to be a little bit more tightly fought, because these teams have the ability to shake off some of that rust that they build up by sitting on the couch for a couple of weeks before they play those games. And then you get an ability for these games to be incredible down the stretch of the season. I think we saw it last week, but in the semifinal games, I think we saw it with Notre Dame and Penn State just going at each other. Ohio State and Texas looking like two defenses that knew exactly what they were doing at every single second. It becomes a war of attrition. You know, the first round games are really fun with those home atmospheres, but the next couple of games really put you in a position to play your best, and then you have these incredible, incredible games going to the back end. But yeah, that's something we'll talk about later in the week, this idea around Notre Dame and what would happen if other teams go independent. Definitely something we'll talk about likely tomorrow in some detail, and then we'll get into it later in the week, look at some teams, including those those four teams right there that you just described, and we'll see what the reality of that is. I find it a little bit hard to believe for a lot of the teams out there, but definitely could happen for a couple of them, and we'll see which ones those teams are later in the week. But the final thing here is rematches are very possible in this one. You know, we've seen it before with Alabama, Georgia, and we saw how those unfolded. Two games that are really, really incredible, two really competitive games in those championship ones. So we could very well see, you know, Oregon, Ohio State next year, or Ohio State, Penn State, or Texas, Georgia, or Texas, Florida. Who knows what happens next year? But at the end of the day, we've had some incredible, incredible finals, and some of them have just been rematches, whether it was from the year before or from earlier in the year. And obviously with the seeding, that creates a couple of questions about when this will happen and how that will kind of unfold, but overall it definitely is something that could help out these and definitely put us in a position where we have some really incredible national championships. So overall, I think it's definitely a worry. You know, these championship games have not been quite as fun as we want them to be over the past couple of years, and maybe tonight's the same. You know, maybe Ohio State goes out there and absolutely rolls Notre Dame. Maybe Notre Dame's defense is just too much for Ohio State, and it definitely puts them in a bad spot. But overall, I really do think we're turning a corner. I think in the world of college football, you're seeing a lot of different teams kind of find their way to the top, and definitely some evening of the scales happening. And then you really just see a lot of different things that are going to happen in this sport, and you see how it could tip the scales a little bit more in some of the smaller teams' favor. And it feels like we're getting there, and it feels like we're going to have some really fun championship games that follow with that. But let's take our final break here, and when we come back, we'll get to a little bit of a weekend catch-up, and we'll talk about all of this stuff, including auto buys, probably not changing for 2025, the Title IX questions for revenue sharing, and the Xavier Lucas saga that has been very, very interesting to watch. But we'll talk about it right after this, so stick with us.